Pendragon Cycle, The Rise of the Merlin. It's coming soon. That TV series, season 1 of that series is coming. And this is the first book that it is based on. Book 1 of the Pendragon Cycle, TALIESIN. I'm Ben Avery. This is Strangers and Aliens, and we are going to be asking the question, that age-old question about science fiction and fantasy written by Christians. Is it worth reading? Let's talk about it. Let's find out. Hey, I'm Ben Avery, and I am a science fiction and fantasy fan. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer, and I love reading science fiction and fantasy. I love watching science fiction and fantasy. I love creating science fiction and fantasy. And Stephen R. Lawhead, in my formative years as a young man growing up as a Christian and as a writer, his fantasy works and science fiction works too, actually, were a part of just helping me to kind of see, like, what does someone do when they are expressing themselves creatively and expressing themselves as a Christian. And so I am very excited to talk about this book we're going to talk about right now. I'm also very excited to see what they do with this book as a TV series. I am assuming, because of the title of the Pendragon Cycle, The Rise of the Merlin, that they are going to be probably in this first season taking this book and condensing it quite a bit. And then also, I got my box set here, also taking parts of this book, Merlin, which I am just starting to read right now, and making that into the first season. It might not be the whole book of Merlin, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go pretty deep into that book, because, I mean, really, when you're talking about the Pendragon Cycle, this is what you want to get to. Arthur, he's the reason. Now, I love King Arthur and his knights. As I've talked about before, this CB right here, when I was in the 90s, it was high school, and whenever I went into a bookstore, a Christian bookstore, I looked for that on the spine in the fiction section, because if that was on the spine, chances were in the fiction section, it was going to be something that would appeal to me. Because of Frank Peretti and This Present Darkness, that CB meant quality Christian speculative fiction. And so there was a few other books that I got that were kind of end times fiction. One was called High Places. One was called Mastermind. There was one about Beowulf and some of the background in the Beowulf story. And I don't remember the title for that one. But then there was also the Stephen R. Lawhead books and the Roger Elwood books, and with Angel Walk. And so those were all books that I was consuming and grabbing. I got this because I asked for it for Christmas, because I circled it in the catalog, the Christian Book Distributors catalog. I also got the book set, or the box set for the Dragon King series. But this is the one that I was very, very excited about, because it was about King Arthur and his knights. When I was a kid, a little kid, I went to a library that was doing a book sale, and I got this book right here, King Arthur and His Knights. It is still a treasured edition. Merry Christmas to Jack from Aunt Irma. December 25th, 1932 is when this was a gift to Jack. The copyright date is 1927, and it was this was a very important book to me. I read it over and over and over again, and I love the illustrations in it. There was some black and white line art like this right here, and then there was also this kind of painted, painterly stuff like this right there. And so this was my introduction to King Arthur. Now, when I read this the first time, in my mind, this was King Arthur. This was the real thing. This is the story. I didn't realize there wasn't the story. There was the stories of King Arthur. But this was the one. And I don't know anything about the author, Elizabeth Loder Merchant. She is the head of Department of English at William Penn High School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Um, but this book was a big book for me. And so when I saw that there was going to be this box set, and it was in the Christian Book Distributors catalog, box set, Crossway Books, Stephen Lawhead, I had already read some of the Dragon King series from our high school library, and I asked for this for Christmas. I got it for Christmas, and I started to read it. Now, my quick review as a high school student of this book here, this book, not the series, but this book, Taliesin, was where's Arthur and Merlin? Where are they? Come on. There is no Arthur and Merlin. In fact, this is not even about Avalon. It's not about Camelot. It's not about Merlin. It's not about Arthur. It's about Atlantis. It's about the sinking of Atlantis, no less. Now, I didn't understand exactly what I was getting into. I also didn't know a lot about the whole Arthurian mythos. Reading it now, knowing what I do know about just the different Arthurian cycles and everything like that, this is backstory to Arthurian legends that really what Stephen Lawhead did with this whole trilogy and then going beyond. I did find my other two editions of Grail and Pendragon. Pendragon is book 4 of the increasingly mistitled trilogy, and Grail is book 5. Then there is a book called Avalon that jumps us into the present day with Merlin, and then there is a flashback book that just came out. I can't remember what the title is, but there's another Arthurian book by Stephen Lawhead that just came out this year, probably to tie in and try and build on some of the hype from the TV series. That's what I would imagine anyway. Now, when I look at this and I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, okay, so this is something that really is diving into the mythos and the lore. And what Stephen Lawhead was doing was he was taking all of these myths and doing a what do you call that? A synthesis, not a synthesis, a harmony of the Arthurian myths and legends, and actually trying to then put it into a more or a less fantasy filled, less magic filled. That's not to say there's no magic at all, but putting it into more of almost like a historical fiction setting and less of a high fantasy setting. Don't get me wrong; the high fantasy tropes are there in this and where I'm at in Merlin. Like there's some really big high fantasy tropes that are going on in Merlin, but in this, it's more of a grounding. It's more like it's the Nolan Batman version of the Arthurian mythos, where we're gonna keep the Batman costume, all right, and we're gonna have, there's certain things you have to have. I mean, Merlin is a wizard or whatever. Although, like I said, he's not in this book. We need to talk about this book only, really. But anyway, this we are in Atlantis, and we are in the British Islands or whatever, and we have Celtic chieftains, and we have Atlantean aristocracy, aristocrats. We'll go with that. But what this book is now, as I'm reading it, as I'm realizing that this is kind of like the world of Krypton, which, if you are familiar with Marvel or not with oh my gosh, if you're familiar with DC Comics, you might know of some of the comic series that they have done. There's a couple different series that they've done called World of Krypton, where they have been telling the story of Krypton and the world leading up to the point where it was destroyed, which the destruction of Krypton is actually the literal launching point as they launch a baby into outer space to land on Earth, as a literal launching point for Superman's origin. Well, that's what this is. This is building its way up to the origin of Merlin. And so it's telling the story of Merlin's family, telling the story of Merlin's parents, really, Taliesin and Karis, and telling who they were just leading up to his birth. And so that's what this is doing, is this is telling that origin story. But along the way, there's also things where you're like, wait a minute, that sword, I wonder, is so it's also reminding me of the Solo movie and other origin stories where it's like, do we really need to know why he has that color shoelace? That kind of thing, where it's like, we're going to take every single thing that you know about this character from, or the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail, where Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade. I'm just getting things wrong today. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where they're going after the Holy Grail, but they have that 15-minute adventure at the beginning where you find out where he get his whip, where did he get his scar, where did he get his hat, where did he get his interest in archaeology, where did he get his fear of snakes. Like, in the course of one afternoon, Everything about Indiana Jones was set in stone. This is how he became a heroic, intrepid archaeologist who believed that artifacts belong in a museum and who was scared of snakes and who was going to use a whip. And now, don't get me wrong, it is tight. Those 15 minutes or however long it is a tight 15 minutes where they are taking it and they are giving you like it's a circus train, and that's where he falls into a vat of snakes, but he also finds the lion tamer's whip. And I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. The whole thing works. It's just a little coincidental. It all happened in one afternoon. Well, that's what we have here. Is we're going to see the origin of some of these things that we know from the myth of King Arthur. The famous stuff is referenced in here, but most of what is in this book is not the famous stuff. It is its own story then to me. When I was reading it as a kid, it was its own thing, but I'm like, where's Arthur and Merlin? Let's get to the good stuff. I only read this book so I could get to these books. Reading it now, this is a really strong fantasy, historical fiction style fantasy book that tells a very strong story, and it's a romance between Karis and Taliesin, and it gives their childhood. I mean, it is literally it is a biography from the childhood, the birth of Taliesin, and the childhood of Karis, all the way up to meeting each other, falling in love, and then realizing who their child is, and then there's an ending. And I don't want to get too much into what the ending is, but um it's unresolved in some ways, definitely leading into a sequel. And as I'm starting into Merlin, you are seeing the threads of okay, the unresolved things that happened at the end of this book. And we also in this one we also see the origin of Morgana. And it's all right here where they're starting. Stephen Lawhead is starting the story at the very, very beginning, and then setting us up for who is this man that becomes, or this, who is this child that becomes the man Merlin, and who becomes this guiding force for this great leader in Arthur. And so, yeah, is it worth reading? I would say yes. This is actually worth reading just on its own, as its own story about Taliesin and about Karis. And I did find myself caring about these characters. And I want to also say, there's just something about these books from Crossway. There was controversy, I guess, that I'm reading about now, where Stephen Law had wanted to go further than he did with these three books, and tell more stories about Arthur and whatever. And they cut him off. They said, nope, you're doing three books. It's a trilogy. That's it. And so that is why we get some timey-wimey shenanigans in Pendragon and in Grail, because, I mean, I really don't remember much about these two books at all, other than it's going out of order. And this is going back in time for flashbacks, and it's one of these stories, one of these books is about Arthur as a child. I don't remember which one, but anyway, so that does mean that when they are structuring the Pendragon TV series, there's a lot to pull on, and I'm curious like what kind of timeline they're working on. I'm also, I mean, this is just me being kind of a pessimist. I do not expect to go into a second season. That's just me. I really don't think they're going to get more than really. I mean, I'm predicting just one season. But the optimist in me would say, well, maybe two seasons. Maybe they get through and we're gonna actually get to. I just don't think we're gonna get the full story of Arthur. Is it worth reading? Yes, it is. It is a solid fantasy, romance, adventure, and then there's all the spiritual ideas and things in there. The things I bookmarked in here were things that were kind of thematic things that really stuck out to me, and stuck out to me in this time. Like timeless truths are one of the best things that you can pull out of fiction. As a writer, you can't help but write things that are of the time that you exist in, and that are going to have as some sort of foundation and basis your past. As a writer, your personal past, which includes the historical past of your family, your nation, your church even, um, but all these things that have been um, slowly forming you, those are things that are going to come out in your writing. But at the same time, if you're a good writer and a wise writer, you're going to be able to write timeless truth. I mean, Tolkien is probably the one that I would look to the most, where I'm like, there's some really poignant and wise things that he says in the pages of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, where you're like, okay, so he wrote this decades and decades and decades and decades ago, but I feel application to me, and so as I was reading Taliesin, it's the same thing here, and so you have um, this one. I love this little interaction that they have here, where they're talking about the oak tree, and they're talking about how things are going to come. There's a sign that happened, and this is actually kind of a nice little moment here too, where tell me, Cormac, was there ever a sign such as the one that brings us here? The elder druid closed his eyes and leaned on his staff. Only once, he replied at length, many years ago, before anyone now alive was born, before the Romans came to the Holy Isle, when this grove was young, there was a similar sign. The stars did not fall, however, but remained converged in the sky, a strange sight, I am told, for those who knew how to see it. What did it betoken? Cormac opened his eyes. Why, the coming of the Jesu, son of the good God. Him the Romans call Christus. I see, replied Halfkin. Perhaps this new sign will be equally auspicious. We can hope, replied Cormac. Like all men, we can hope. Well, I will come to you before midsummer to see the child, keep him safe. He will be kept well, never fear, answered Halfkin. I will see to it. Cormac lifted his eyes to gaze at the spreading branches above. This oak was already old when I was born. Now I am old and soon to die, and this tree grows strong still. We are small creatures, Halfkin. Our lives are not long. Long enough to learn what is required of us. Oh, aye, long enough to learn what we need to learn. But not long enough to change anything, agreed Cormac wistfully. That is our flaw. Each age must learn everything afresh. Such waste! Such waste, making all the mistakes once again, each generation making the same mistakes, fumbling in ignorance and darkness. He raised a hand to the tree. Hail, stout brother! Know our weakness, and do not unkindly consider us. I just love that interaction, especially when he's looking at the oak and like, this oak was old when I was born, and but then also just the ideas of we are short-lived here on earth, and we can learn from our elders, we can learn from those who went before us, but we don't. and and we're not here long enough to teach everything, to learn everything on our own. So then there's this section here where the druid Halfkin is talking to a couple of children. They're looking at some birds and some pigeons. And neither do I see a reason why wood pigeons should fly as they do, the young man admitted. It makes no sense to me. Look again, my dull-witted friends, sighed Halfkin. Look beyond the pigeons. The boys raised their eyes. Higher, higher, look above. Higher still, what do you see? What is there? What is there? What is it that soars without a wing stroke? A hawk, I see it, cried Blaze, jumping up. A hawk. Ah, a hawk, yes, what kind? The boy's elation turned at once to dismay. I cannot see that far. Nor can I, chuckled Halfkin. But that in itself should suggest something. Blaze's brow wrinkled with the effort of his thought. A kite, or one of the red-tailed kind. The pigeons fly low and close together to escape. Well done, lad. But by Horn Corunus, it's like pulling teeth. Blaze followed the flight of the pigeons as they disappeared into the woods. He turned to his master, beaming. I see now. The presence of the predator addles their flight. They fly like that for fear. Fear? What of fear? It is a powerful advocate of action. It is the most powerful advocate, more powerful than any other. Fear inspires the timid and makes bold the brave. That is true, replied Halfgan. But there is one advocate greater still. Blaze and Indeg shared a puzzled glance. What is it? They asked. Hope, Halfgan said softly. Hope is the most powerful advocate of all. And then there's this moment here. This one reminded me of something that might have been, you could have read this. I mean, Tolkien might have written something like this here. Maybe a little more eloquently, but not much. and, um, uh, Taliesin is talking to Cormac, his master. He says, "But tell me, master, what can be done about the darkness? We must do something. Each must do what he can, Taliesin. That is all that ever can be done by men. Yet, if all men did only that, it would be enough. Yes, and more than enough." Taliesin frowned again. "If, do you mean some will not resist?" "No, lad, they will not. Some men, it is true, have no light in them, and give themselves to the darkness when it comes. It makes our task that much more difficult." "Then we must all be the stronger," replied Taliesin bravely. So again, it's just another moment where it just like they're talking about the world that they live in, but then there's these timeless truths that they're talking about, and this is another one right here, um, where they're talking about a sign. They're talking about earthquake that had happened. Um, there was an earthquake in Poseidonus. It happened when I was in in the bull ring, a small one, little damage. No one was hurt, but the temple crystal was shattered. The next one will be bigger, and the one after that. What did the people of Poseidonus do? Do? Why, nothing. There was no real damage. They went on about their business. The signs are there for anyone to read, Anubi told her, but no one heeds them. Men go on with their business as if the world would last forever. It will not. It never does. We could tell them, warn them. Do you really believe anyone would listen? Anubi scoffed. They will not listen. Throm has been telling them for years. But the earthquake, they would believe. Oh, yes, the earthquake. They will believe when their houses crumble upon them, when the lintels of the temple crack and the sacred edifice falls. Then they will believe. But it will be too late. But surely, she began. Anubi continued a few paces, stopped suddenly, and whipped toward her. Do you think this is a first disaster to overtake Atlantis? There have been others. And then goes on to talk about it. But um, what's interesting about that little exchange right there is you know what's going to happen to Atlantis. And when you're talking about earthquakes and stuff, know like this is going to be the destruction of Atlantis. What's also interesting about this book is you do have, in my opinion, one of the better conversion stories where you have people who um, are not followers of God, who are confronted with God, confronted with God's truth, and who respond to it. And that's something that uh, it's difficult to do well, in my opinion. And I give a lot of grace to people who try and don't do it well because it is difficult to do a fictional story where you don't have a lifetime of experiences and a lifetime of um, background and backstory. Uh, but then how you also have another person coming to them, kind of talking to them about whatever and then there's discovery of the truth and discovery of what God says and who God is and all that. It's very difficult to take what is momentous and huge and distill it into a work of fiction. It's difficult to do that. And I've only had a couple characters in my own fiction who have actually come to that turning point, and and that's part of why I say it's difficult to do well because it was difficult for me to do, and whether I did it well or not, well, that's something that the people who read those things can judge for themselves. But anyway, um, I just also wanted to point out just how beautiful these books are. These covers with the Celtic knots and everything. This spawned a not obsession with Celtic knots, but I love the idea of the Celtic knot and how it goes and it comes back and it returns. And but then you also have just the way that they typeset things here, and they include those that Celtic knot artwork in here for every chapter heading. And yeah. The other thing I'll say stylistically is that there are three parts in this book here. There's three parts. There is the a gift of jade, which there's another, like if you're looking at the heading here. It's just simple and it's just a little added touch. It's not important. Also, like scene breaks within the chapters have that kind of Celtic knot thing there going as well. It's 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 not huge. It's not a big deal. It's just a nice touch to me. I like the style, and when I do typesetting for my own books, um, I want it to have just a little bit of style. Um, it doesn't have quite this much style as well, but yeah, there's three parts. There's part one is a gift of jade. which is more about childhoods. Part 2 is the Sun Bull, and then part 3 is the Merlin, which is leading up to the birth of the Merlin. The Sun Bull stuff, I will say, like when I read this, the big thing I remember is the bull dancing. And so when I saw the trailer for the Pendragon Cycle, the Rise of the Merlin, and I saw, oh, they are doing some of the bull dancing stuff. But that was very, very vivid memories for me when I read these. Um, and of course, the sinking of Atlantis was a vivid memory for me when I read this, and was coming back into this. And not much else. Like there was some plot twists in here that I was like, oh, I did not remember that, and so it was kind of a nice rediscovery. That's Taliesin. That's my review of the book. Is it worth reading? You bet it is. You bet it is. So, just some last minute business. Please hit like, hit subscribe. Please let me know. Are you planning to watch the series? Do you have memories of Taliesin? I would love to hear below. Let me know. Like, what memories do you have of Taliesin? Have you recently read it? Do you feel it holds up? Do you feel it's worth reading? And then also, are you planning to watch a series? I'm very curious how that's going to play out. There is another series that I'm very curious about too. That's another fantasy series that started last week, and that is the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is related to Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones. But that's something that I'm connected to because I did the graphic novel adaptations of The Hedge Knight, which is what the Night of the Seven Kingdoms is based on. And then there's also Star Trek Starfleet Academy, which I did a review of just recently. So the other business to get out of the way is, please, if you are into this kind of thing from Stephen Lawhead, you might enjoy some of my sci-fi. Ghost of the Future is a timey-wimey adventure about a crew from a starship who find a strange anomaly. But then I also have these 3 anthologies where I work with some amazing, amazing, amazing writers. And Parabolic Orbits is the newest one, takes Jesus's parables, turns some of them into science fiction stories. And then there is Following Yonder Star. Yes, it is a Christmas book, but you know what? You could probably still enjoy it. And that it's just a lot of fun for me to have done this Christmas book. And then A Time for Everything, which takes the poem from Ephesians 3, and each story took as its title and theming part of that poem: a time to live, a time to die, a time to weep, a time to laugh, all those things. So please check me out if you like that kind of thing. Check those things out on Amazon where you can purchase them, or you can purchase them at benavery.com. So yeah, all that to say, thank you so much for spending time with me. Thank you so much for listening to my raving. Not quite. This was not quite a rave review, but it's about as close to a rave review as I can get without it being a rave review. I definitely think this is worth reading, especially if you like fantasy and or the Arthurian legends. So I am actually thinking, like, even while I'm reading Merlin, maybe I might take a break and take a look at this older book and read through it again. This is where I learned about who Gawain was, and this is how finding out about Lancelot and yeah, the sword in the stone, the Holy Grail. This is where all that stuff is where I first was confronted with it. This and Disney's Sword in the Stone. But yeah, I'm trying to see if I can quickly find the picture of the sword that was in here, but I can. Oh, there it is. There it is. Look at the hand there holding the sword up. And yeah. Yeah, and there is Arthur sitting in the boat, and you can see I spent a lot of time on this page. It's torn out, not on purpose. So, yeah, you can see I spent a lot of time in this book. I'm getting lost in here. I need So, until next time, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, and until next time, Godspeed. Waste. Such waste, making all the mistakes once again, each generation making the same mistakes, fumbling in ignorance and darkness.